Does every vote really count the same in America? At first, it feels like the answer should be yes. After all, democracy is built on the idea that every citizen has an equal voice. But when it comes to choosing the president, things aren't that simple. Instead of the popular vote deciding the winner, the United States uses something called the Electoral College. It's a system that has sparked heated debate for centuries, and many argue it's one of democracy's biggest flaws. In this video, we're going to break it all down. You'll see why the Electoral College was created, how it works today, and why so many people either defend it or want to get rid of it. By the end, you'll understand the hidden power behind this system, and you might even see your own vote in a new light. Stay with me until the end, because the last part will reveal examples of when the system overruled the people's choice, and that's where the real shock lies. So, what exactly is the Electoral College? Let's strip away the confusion and make it simple. Imagine the United States as a giant group project. Each state is like a team, and every team gets a certain number of points. Those points are called electoral votes. The bigger your team, meaning the larger your state's population, the more points you get. Smaller states get fewer points, but here's the twist. No state gets left out. Even the least populated states still get a minimum of 3 votes. Altogether, there are 538 electoral votes in the country. To win the presidency, a candidate doesn't need all of them. They just need more than half. The magic number is 270. Cross that line, and you're in the White House. Now, how does a candidate earn these votes? This is where things get interesting. On Election Day, people go to the polls and cast their ballots, just like in any normal election. But here's the catch. When you vote, you're not actually voting directly for the president. You're voting for a group of electors who have promised to support your candidate. Those electors are the ones who officially cast the electoral votes. It sounds indirect, and it is. In most states, the system works on a winner-takes-all rule. That means if candidate A wins, even by a tiny margin, they take all of that state's electoral votes. For example, if there are 55 votes in California and candidate A beats candidate B by just 1%, candidate A still walks away with all 55. Only 2 states, Maine and Nebraska, play by different rules and split their votes. What this really means is that the race for president isn't about getting the most people in the nation to vote for you. It's about winning the right combination of states. A candidate could pile up millions of votes in one region, but if they don't hit the right states, they lose. That's why you'll often hear about the focus on swing states. But we'll get to that soon. So at its core, the Electoral College is like a scoreboard where states, not individual people, hold the keys to victory. And that's where both the genius and the controversy begins. So why does this unusual system even exist? Why not just count every vote and pick the winner? To answer that, we have to rewind more than 200 years, all the way back to the late 1700s. The United States was brand new, the Constitution was being written, and the Founding Fathers faced a huge problem. How should the president be chosen? At first, there were 2 main ideas on the table. Some leaders wanted a simple national vote. Every person's ballot counted equally, and the majority would win. Others worried about this approach. They argued that in such a large country, with scattered towns and farmland, the people might not know enough about candidates from faraway states. They also feared that big states with huge populations would dominate, leaving smaller states powerless. To break the deadlock, they created a compromise, the Electoral College. It was designed as a middle ground between pure democracy and control by Congress. Instead of giving all the power directly to the people or letting politicians choose the president themselves, the Electoral College gave states a role. Each state got electoral votes based partly on population, but with a built-in bonus that gave small states more influence than their size alone would allow. Another reason for this system was mistrust. The founders didn't entirely trust direct democracy. They worried that voters could be swayed too easily by emotion or tricked by false promises. The electors were meant to act as a safeguard, a group of wise, responsible figures who could step in if the people made a reckless choice. Of course, over time, electors stopped making independent decisions. Today, they almost always follow the results of their state's vote. But back then, this safety net seemed important. So, the Electoral College was born out of fear, compromise, and caution. It was meant to balance big and small states, protect against mob rule, and keep the young nation united. But while it solved problems in the 1700s, it created new ones for the future. Now that we know what the Electoral College is and why it was created, let's look at how it actually plays out in real elections. On paper, the system might sound balanced, but in practice, it creates some surprising and sometimes unfair outcomes. The first thing to know is the winner-takes-all rule in most states. This means that if one candidate wins a state by even a tiny margin, they walk away with all of that state's electoral votes. Imagine this. Candidate A gets 51 of the vote in Florida, and candidate B gets 49. That's a razor-thin difference. But candidate A still claims all 30 of Florida's electoral votes, while candidate B gets nothing. Millions of ballots end up having no impact on the final score. This rule shapes how campaigns are run. Instead of trying to win votes everywhere, candidates zoom in on a handful of swing states. These are states that could realistically go to either party. Think of places like Pennsylvania, Michigan, or Arizona. Because their outcomes are uncertain, campaigns pour money, ads, and attention into them. Meanwhile, states that are considered safe, solidly red or blue, get ignored. If you live in California or Wyoming, chances are your vote doesn't get much attention because the result there is seen as predictable. The effect is striking. A voter in Ohio or Wisconsin might feel like their ballot carries enormous weight, while someone in Texas or New York could feel invisible. The race isn't about getting the most people to support you nationwide. It's about stacking up the right states like puzzle pieces until you hit 270. Another twist is how close elections can expose the flaws. In some cases, a shift of just a few thousand votes in a swing state can flip the entire election, even if the other candidate won millions more votes overall. That's why on election night, everyone watches those swing states light up the map because they decide everything. So, in practice, the Electoral College turns national elections into a battle for a few states, leaving the rest of the country on the sidelines. And that's where the controversy starts to heat up. The Electoral College might sound clever on paper, but critics argue it creates serious problems for democracy. Let's walk through the biggest complaints. First, the most obvious flaw. A candidate can lose the popular vote but still win the presidency. This has actually happened more than once in U.S. history. Imagine millions more people voting for one candidate nationwide, yet the other walks away with the keys to the White House. For many, that feels like democracy turned upside down. Second, not all votes carry the same weight. Here's why. Smaller states have fewer people, but still get a minimum of 3 electoral votes. That means each individual voter in a small state has more influence than a voter in a big state. For example, a ballot cast in Wyoming counts for far more, mathematically, than a ballot cast in California. Critics say this is unfair because some citizens end up with louder voices than others. Third, the system pushes all the attention onto swing states. Candidates design their entire campaigns around them. They hold rallies there, spend millions on ads there, and make promises to win those voters. Meanwhile, millions of Americans living in states considered safe are practically ignored. If you live in a reliably red or blue state, your issues may never even be discussed. Another major criticism is the effect on voter turnout. People who know their state will almost certainly go one way may feel like their vote doesn't matter. Why show up if the result is already predictable? This can discourage participation and weaken the idea that every voice matters in a democracy. Finally, the winner-takes-all system exaggerates divisions. Instead of reflecting the mix of voters in each state, it paints them as entirely red or entirely blue. That creates a picture of a nation more polarized than it really is. So, the criticisms boil down to this. The Electoral College can silence millions of voters, give unequal power to different states, and even hand victory to someone most Americans didn't choose. To critics, these aren't small quirks. They're fundamental flaws that put democracy itself into question. With all those criticisms, you might wonder why the Electoral College still exists. If it's so flawed, why not just switch to a national popular vote? The answer is that many people strongly defend the system, and they believe it's essential to keeping the country balanced. The first big defense is protection for smaller states. Without the Electoral College, candidates could win by only focusing on huge population centers like Los Angeles, New York City, or Chicago. Supporters argue this would leave rural areas and smaller states forgotten. The Electoral College forces candidates to consider different regions, not just the biggest cities. Second, they say it prevents tyranny of the majority. In other words, it keeps one part of the country from dominating everyone else. The United States is large and diverse, with very different cultures, economies, and values. The Electoral College, defenders claim, makes sure a president has to appeal to a wide coalition, not just one powerful group of voters. Another defense is stability. Because of the winner-takes-all system, elections usually produce a clear result, instead of being dragged out in endless recounts. Imagine trying to recount every single vote across all 50 states if a national election was razor-thin. By dividing the country into state-by-state contests, the system can settle disputes more quickly and avoid nationwide chaos. Supporters also argue that the system encourages unity. A candidate can't just rack up votes in one corner of the nation. They have to reach across state lines and appeal to people in different regions. In theory, this builds presidents who represent the entire country, not just one section of it. Finally, defenders point to history. The system has been in place since the very beginning of the Republic. For them, it's a core part of the American design. They see it not as a flaw, but as a safeguard that has helped the U.S. remain stable through centuries of political change. So, while critics see the Electoral College as outdated and unfair, defenders see it as a vital protection. To them, it's not a weakness of democracy, but one of its strengths. We've talked about the theory, but the real impact of the Electoral College becomes clear when you look at history. There are several elections where the winner of the presidency was not the winner of the popular vote. These moments turned the system from an abstract debate into a national controversy. One of the most famous examples happened in the year 2000. George W. Bush and Al Gore were locked in a razor-thin race. Gore won the popular vote by more than 500,000 ballots. But because of a tense battle in Florida and a Supreme Court decision that stopped the recount, Bush carried the state and its 25 electoral votes. That gave him the Electoral College victory, even though most Americans voted for Gore. The result left the country divided, with many questioning the fairness of the system. Fast forward to 2016, and the controversy came back. Hillary Clinton received nearly 3 million more votes nationwide than Donald Trump. Yet Trump secured the presidency by winning key swing states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. The Electoral College once again overruled the popular choice. This sparked massive debate, protests, and renewed calls to abolish the system. But these aren't the only cases. Way back in 1824, Andrew Jackson won the most popular votes, but didn't secure enough electoral votes to claim victory. The decision went to the House of Representatives, which chose John Quincy Adams instead. Jackson's supporters were outraged, calling it a corrupt bargain. And in 1888, Grover Cleveland won the popular vote, but lost the Electoral College to Benjamin Harrison. Cleveland would later come back to win another term, but that election left scars and fueled arguments about fairness. These examples show the power of the system. The Electoral College doesn't just shape campaigns, it can overturn the will of the majority. Each time this happens, the same question rises to the surface. If the person with the most votes doesn't win, can we really call it democracy? The Electoral College has been challenged for decades, and today, the debate is louder than ever. On one side are people who believe the system is broken and must be reformed or even abolished. On the other side are defenders who argue that changing it would tear apart the balance that holds the nation together. Critics say the solution is simple. Move to a direct popular vote. Count every ballot equally, add them up, and let the majority decide. To them, this is the purest form of democracy. No more swing states, no more uneven voting power, and no more presidents who lose the popular vote but win the office. Every citizen's voice would matter in the exact same way, no matter where they live. Supporters of reform also point out how technology has changed the landscape. When the Electoral College was created, information moved slowly, and people in one region might never even know much about candidates from another. Today, in the age of the internet, social media, and 24-hour news, voters have instant access to information. The old fears of voters being too uninformed no longer make sense in the same way. But defenders push back hard. They argue that removing the Electoral College could actually divide the country further. If candidates only chased big city votes, rural communities might feel ignored and powerless. They believe this would fuel resentment and make politics even more polarized. There's also the challenge of actually changing the system. The Electoral College is written into the Constitution. Abolishing it would require a constitutional amendment, which needs approval from 2/3 of Congress and 3/4 of the states. Smaller states, which benefit from the system, have little reason to give up their influence. That makes sweeping reform nearly impossible. As a result, the debate goes on. Some push for smaller changes, like the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, where states pledge their electoral votes to the national winner. Others want to keep things exactly as they are. The tension shows no signs of ending because at its core, this is not just about math or votes. It's about what kind of democracy America wants to be. So, is the Electoral College democracy's flaw, or is it democracy's balance? That's the big question we've been circling around. On one hand, the system was designed as a safeguard, a compromise to protect both big and small states and to prevent a single group from dominating the nation. On the other hand, it has created real frustrations, times when the person with the most votes didn't become president, and millions of citizens felt their voices were muted. This tension has never gone away. Every election brings the debate back to life. Some people call it unfair, outdated, and undemocratic. Others say it's one of the foundations that has kept the United States stable for over 2 centuries. Both sides see themselves as defending democracy, but they disagree on what democracy truly means. And that's where the real weight of the question falls. Should democracy be about every vote counting the same, no matter where you live? Or should it be about balancing power between states, even if that means some votes carry more influence than others? There isn't an easy answer, and that's why this debate has lasted for so long. But here's what we do know. The Electoral College is not just a technical detail hidden in the Constitution. It's the heart of how the most powerful office in the world is decided. Understanding it isn't just history or politics. It's about understanding the value of your own vote. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think the Electoral College should stay, or should America move to a direct popular vote? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more clear, no-fluff explanations of big topics. And remember, the last time the system overruled the people's choice, it changed history. Will it happen again? That's a question we'll all have to keep watching.